Everybody for joining this morning. Let me get my chairman's briefing up. So, obviously, welcome to this morning's meeting, everybody. So today we have got quite a full schedule to talk about, and I would like to welcome also members of the Environment Panel who have decided to attend today to talk about home to school transport, because that actually goes across Scrutiny. And let's go through the agenda. So first is apologies.
Thank you. We've got apologies from Tim Reid.
Thank you. Okay, and then declarations of interest or party whip from anybody. Seeing none, we'll move on. Confirmation of minutes of the previous... Oh, no, it's not. It's public participation first. Yeah. I do apologise. That's really important. And I really want to thank the people who've came along today to speak. Obviously, as you know, I've just explained, you'll get 3 minutes to speak. The first person is Robert Barrowman Jr. If you would like to come up to... There we go. Perfect, thank you. As I said, you'll have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Hello, my name is Robert Barrowman Jr. Myself and my family requested independent investigation into Worcestershire County Council. We believe this investigation was not independent, it was instead carried out by a Worcestershire County Council employee. In a report produced for this investigation, the head of Worcestershire Children's Services, Daniela Carson, who was only the director for a very brief period, is quoted as believing the council achieved its aim and provided the appropriate support. What was its aim? When was it set? Who was it set by? What were its criteria? How can anyone in their right mind claim the council achieved their aim and provided the necessary support? I was only able to achieve what I have through the support of my family and my own hard work. None of it, and I repeat, none of it was as a result of the actions of Worcestershire County Council or Worcestershire Children First, who have been entirely incompetent and corrupt throughout the entire process. Their statement is based entirely in fiction. I'm physically disabled and autistic, so I am entitled by law to support, which should have been provided by the local authority and the NHS. But instead, my parents had to provide this support privately at great personal financial cost. The council spent for years fighting us in numerous tribunals, constantly making an excuse of its cost, despite the cost of tribunals for them being well over £90,000. This was confirmed to us by Councillor Sam Amar, who received the information for a Freedom of Information request. When we sent in the same request, it was refused. The cost of actually providing the support for myself is significantly lower than that figure. The council fought us so hard to the point where they actually accused my parents of causing my disabilities in a refusal to assess document. Melanie Barnett said to us, "It's not personal, it's business. We can't afford it, but you can afford to spend so much on lawyers." Myself and my family have been repeatedly lied to and strung along by incompetent and deceitful people such as Kyle Daisley, Maria Hardy, and Melanie Barnett, who, despite our repeated assurances that the school the repeated assurances that the issue with the school would be appropriately dealt with, and she was aware of the school's abuses of power, such as sending police to my home during the COVID pandemic to get my parents to send myself and my brother back to school, despite being provided with countless medical documents and shielding letters from multiple medical professionals stating that we should not be sent back to school. This was also during a national lockdown. It was shielding due to my mother's cancer diagnosis and the fact that she was undergoing chemotherapy followed by radiotherapy. However, the school did not believe that she had cancer and insisting on sending 2 people to visually confirm she had cancer. What was Mr. Chris Smith's intentions, being well aware of the situation with my mother? Despite this, Melanie Barnett still did nothing to provide justice for these abuses of power. As well as this, how did the school have the authorities to send police to our door without going through the proper channels? There is no record of this police visit. Also, in regards to the police, during my time at Astorfields Middle School, my father was served with a gagging order document by Karen Balsenko and Baker Small solicitors, which were later found to be a false document. This information was provided to us by Councillor Kyle Daisley. How are the police able to be used to harass and intimidate us without record? We believe that because Kyle was a special constable, we reported it to the proper authorities. As part of trying to get justice, we have made numerous complaints, and as part of this, we requested an independent investigation be done into Worcestershire County Council.
Thank you very much for your time. That was 3 minutes. If you've got anything else you wanted to add.
He has 2 paragraphs to finish. I believe that it's in the interest of everybody in this room.
Okay, if you could please send that in writing, as I said beforehand, that would be absolutely fantastic, and we can make sure we get you a written response. Thank you.
Please let him finish.
You've had your 3 minutes.
There's 2 paragraphs left. Everybody in this room needs to hear the rest of his statement. Do everybody agree? Or are we just going to shut this
I'm really sorry, but that's not the way this. That's not the way this works. You have been given 3 minutes, but what else you want to send in, please send it in, and we'll make sure you get a written response. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. I'd now like to call Dawn Stiles, please. Dawn Stile. Thank you. If you press the one on the right, which has got the, it looks like a face, and then you'll have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Right, it's my question one. Why do Worcester Council continue to stigmatise SEN children and young people and make them scapegoats for your budgeting and financial crisis? Can you explain why Worcester Council over many years have consistently and negligently failed to either accurately collect or record data and statistics, plan ahead strategically, or consider the full range of demographics? 2, why was the council guilty of wasting millions of pounds of public and government money, then producing and presenting budgets with expenditures for SEN legally required services and homeschool transport that neither accurately represents or reflects the services delivered or received by SEN children and young people? 3, can Worcester Council confidently report and evidence that they have spent their budgets in line with their legal duties and requirements, consistently using best practice, value for money, and looking at all areas where savings could be made? 4, as SEN children and young people continue to bear the brunt of this council's failings, are they prepared to be honest, transparent, commit to an independent audit of their expenditures and finances? Do you agree it's the least this council owes all Worcester residents as a council failing and facing potential bankruptcy? Worcester have a contract with Warwickshire Council to provide legal services with solicitors and barristers to fight SEN parent carers, yet lose over 98% of cases at tribunal, with legal costs often exceeding the parent carer's original sought-after needs. Homeschool transport is frequently not paid to entitled parent carers, many increasingly using the direct travel payment option, which is a massive saving to Worcester, who only now pay 45 pence a mile since March 24, when 13 pence a mile was not unusual. Also, the taxi contracts are neither safe or conducive to learning if you're stuck in a taxi for 3 or 4 hours daily. Hundreds of children are without education for months and years at a time, despite having an EHCP. Far too many permanently excluded at very young ages. Worcester leave them on roll and then do not actively reclaim the funding costs, potentially running into millions of pounds. These practices also give a false number of missing in education numbers, which goes against legislation to protect vulnerable children from serious harm or death and exposes SEN children and young people to higher risks of abuse and exploitation, which is something this council already fails to acknowledge. The above practices and carers' assessments for SEN parent carers of under 18s being unlawfully denied continues to fail these families and no doubt contributes to the increase in children in care costs, particularly of those with complex needs. This council is not fit for purpose. They don't represent the majority of Worcester residents. There is zero genuine co-production, there is zero empathy and zero ability to turn around these failing services. It's about time you all needed to listen. Because enough is enough, because you're not listening, you aren't honest, you have no intention of turning things around. So, yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, and I'll ensure that you do get a written response to that. Okay, thank you. Now we can move on to agenda item 4, which is confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Has anybody got any issues about the accuracy of those minutes? No? In that case, they're passed? Agreed? Agreed. Perfect. Okay, that brings us on to our substantive item for today, agenda item 5, which is home to school transport. Now, today we're going to be provided with an update on developments relating to the provision of home to school transport, and the Cabinet member with responsibility for highways and transport have been invited. Education and the strategic directors for children's services and economy and infrastructure have all been invited too. So in attendance today we have Councillor David Chambers, Councillor Steve Mackay, Stuart Payton, Paul Smith, Adam Johnston, Daniela Carson and Sarah Wilkins. Thank you and welcome. Can I ask please who is going to kickstart us off with this one?
I'll kickstart you off very, very briefly, and then I'll hand over to Paul, sat to my right here as Assistant Director for E&I, who will do a little summary of the report, basically, and then we'll open it up thereafter. Just by way of introduction, while it's Paul who's doing a summary of the report, given the fact that home to school transport in terms of responsibility sits under E&I, there's an obvious relevance in terms of social care being at this table as well, and indeed our CMR for education and for social care, given the significant cohort of SEND children requiring home to school transport arrangements. And I think the other thing I wanted to just touch upon really, really briefly, and by no means am I a spokesperson for the Worcestershire Parent Carer Forum, but I know within the context of the report, there's some concern to some of the terminology used with regards specifically to parental expectations. This will come out when we summarise the report and indeed further discussions thereafter. Just to assure panel and indeed attendees today, that's not a critique, it's one of a number of issues that contribute to the increase in demand. And this is specifically around parental preference, which is underpinned in the current legislation with regard to school choice. But important that I make reference to that, but equally important that I make reference to the fact that by no means am I a spokesperson for the Parent Carer Forum. So maybe if I hand over to Paul, just to summarise the report, and then we take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, and good morning all, and thank you for the invitation today to come along and talk about home to school transport. So I'm the Assistant Director for Highways and Transport Operations. My colleague to my right is Stuart Paynton. He's the Head of Transport Operations. So we're responsible for providing home to school transport both for mainstream and obviously SEND. I think at the outset it's probably just important just to highlight the numbers we're dealing with. So the collective daily figure we transport, home to school transport clients is somewhere like 10,500, with about 2,600 being SEND. So that's every day to a journey to and from school. So obviously the scope of that is quite significant. There's a number of operators involved with that, both from private sector and indeed our in-house fleet. So, you know, it's not insignificant. As we all know, you know, the demand for SEND home to school transport has grown significantly in recent years as well. This isn't unique to Worcestershire. We see this on the national stage. From a local authority perspective, we currently have 6,700 children and young people with an education healthcare plan, and this is formulated, having been reviewed by a number of professionals. So to obtain that plan in terms of transport eligibility, there are a number of subject matter experts involved with making that decision, which is really good in terms of the child care, because once they start transport, they do come into the authority's care. So that's outlines the plan. It will outline the transport requirements and a number of other things. Transport requirements increasingly, you would find in some of the data we've got, we are using taxis, and that's because of the number of things. That's to do with wherever the child is based in terms of where they live, and then where they're transported to to their educational setting. Some of that is prohibitive in terms of allowing us to use minibuses to a greater extent, but where possible, we do use transport to be as cost effective as we can, but by definition of the requirements of the individual and the settings, then often that isn't achievable. But it is about providing the child with the right level of care on that journey. So it's an important start and end to the day, and obviously one we take very seriously. You'll also be aware, this won't be a surprise to anybody, but from a national position, the Education Act of 1996 places the duty on all local authorities to provide free home to school transport with various eligibility criteria, and that's obviously something we adhere to. Interestingly, the forecast is by 27-28, if there's no significant change from a national policy perspective, then it's projected that all local authorities may be spending as much as 2.6 billion. So this is something central, the new central government are looking at, and we're watching that space. I think just in terms of broader context, so the Worcestershire position, there's an increase. So in terms of 2014 to 2022, there's been a 5.3% increase in the population, and again with subsequent forecasts of about 4.3%. So we know, the population generally is increasing, and obviously that will increase the demand for a number of services, one of which is obviously home to school transport. The budget's gone up significantly based on the increase in demand. We track demand year on year, and I think the year we were in, there was another increase of circa 21%. So again, from a national perspective, Worcestershire isn't an outlier. It's in line with the national trend with increase in demand. And I suppose the important bit I would draw your attention to is that the cost of transport isn't linear in terms of demand. It depends on a number of things. So whether there's passenger assistance, the journey time, complexity of the issues. So it isn't as straightforward as an A to B cost. Quite a bit more complex than one may assume. In terms of mainstream, which is obviously the largest cohort we deal with, we saw significant growth in that, but that's now sort of relatively in steady state, and we don't anticipate any significant growth of that other than in line with obviously the population growth. So we continue to see, as we track this, we continue to see year-on-year increase in the number of pupils with EHCPs requiring transport, and it just is some useful information. We've broken that down into types of transport provision. So direct transport payments is our first option for parents. Parents find that really useful. It gives them the autonomy to provide transport for their child. We reimburse them at the HMRC rate, which is below tax, etc. So that covers a number of elements. So it will cover fuel, wear and tear on the car, and that's a national standard reimbursement rate, which we use if parents choose that option. We also use then taxes. So in terms of the contracts, we got sort of circa 700 taxis with just over 100 minibuses. Again, that's provided by contractors within Worcestershire. So in terms of from an operational perspective, what can we do to do our part to address the cost increases? So for a number of years, probably going back to 2013, we do an annual program, or indeed monitored monthly, which we call a rolling transport review. So we look at all of the contracts, and we make sure they're still fit for purpose. We've got some really good software which we're probably in the fore from a local authority perspective of using. So we've got some software which we use for route optimization and scheduling. And whilst that provides a financial benefit, there's almost very much in the focus in terms of the collaboration with our children's services colleagues is about the needs of the child. Can we get the child to the setting in the most efficient way in terms of journey time? And obviously that brings financial benefits. But it purely isn't about finance, it is about the needs of the child. So over the last 10 years or so, we've averaged about £1 million in savings from carrying out those reviews. And with the increasing budget in where we are in the spend, we were asked if we could enhance that. So this year, in a full year effect, we're going to achieve £1.6 million. But just to highlight, I think that is a number of benefits. One's finance, but one is trying to make sure we optimise the journey for the clients we convey. From a setting perspective, we're also with our children's services colleagues, they're looking at a number of things which will enable children and young people to be able to live and learn in their local area. So they're obviously looking at that from a settings perspective, and we've continued to invest in that. So recently invested in Regency High School, Worcester City and Wyre Forest, and through collaboration of Heart of England College and National Star College, we've opened a post-16 special provision in Worcester City from September of last year. So the collaboration is really important, because I think if you put the child at the heart of this, if they can live and learn locally, great. That reduces transport costs, which is a bonus. But I would emphasise that we do look at that holistically across the piece. So I wouldn't want people to think we do transport in a bubble. It is very much integrated with working with our children's services colleagues. I think the other bit, I guess, is multifaceted, isn't it? We could talk about a number of things, but in terms of the environment, since the introduction of our new software, we're having a positive track, able to track, obviously, mileage by individual contracts. Therefore, we're starting to calculate the emissions. So one thing we want to look at from a future context is what's the carbon footprint of what we're doing. It's certainly not in the top 10 in terms of childcare, but it's something we need to be alive to from an environmental perspective as we move forward, to at least have that data available. And of course, what we do as well in terms of a number of transport facets, we use community transport. So community transport features quite highly in our world in terms of they now provide demand responsive transport, and they're also involved with home to school transport as well. So something we want to do with them is we work very closely. They help us with home to school transport and public transport. It also makes community transport more sustainable because it provides income for them. So we work closely with that sector, and we make sure that they're alive to every contract we go into the commercial marketplace. So I think that's the salient point of what we do. Hopefully you've got a flavour of the scope, the size of the challenge, and how we try to mitigate some of those costs with the hand of cards we've got. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. Just before we go to questions for everybody, I wanted to just double check a point you said there. You said that the forecast is for 4.3% growth in population. Has that tailored into that, the increase in homes we are now expected to be building? Because that's, I know it was only December last year that we got those, but the new NPPF states that in some areas it's tripling the amount of houses to be built in the next 4 years. So has that been taken into account here?
These figures were provided by our business intelligence sort of department, so I'll go away and ask and make sure that that's included.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of run with it. I'm at the moment expecting that will be pre the December NPPF, so that forecast 4.3% could grow quite considerably. Okay, I'm going to go to questions first, and Brandon had his hand up very early, so thank you. Over to you, Brandon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the, I listened to your report, Paul and Stuart, and it begs a number of questions actually, because we talk about the increase of the different types of transport, i.e. taxis and other high-cost forms, and then we also talk about parents' preferences to the various schools, and which is understandable and everything else. And then we talk about the, if I'm reading this correctly, you're saying that the education bill at the moment will not change. If there's no change by 27-28, the cost of providing this by various councils throughout the country is 2.6 billion, just on home to school transport. So, and when I look at the transport budget, which is on page 3, it says to me that what we've actually been doing, because I know there's certain constraints that we have to do through home to school transport and everything else, but have we been lobbying government for changes to this education bill because of the different needs change over the years, and whether it's not. So my question is, are we asking either through which particular body, either a national body or ourselves as at County Council, ask questions of various ministers or Secretary of State of what's actually happening, because you're right, we can't go on till 27-28 in just exactly the same position at this moment in time, because it doesn't make sense to me.
Adam.
The short answer to your question is yes, we have been lobbying and we've been consistently lobbying. So what you're referring to is clearly it's a national issue, and it's a national issue that's been lobbied on from a national perspective. So by way of example, and it is just example, so via the CCN, there's been a huge amount of national lobbying before government. At a local level, with regard to our MPs, we've lobbied accordingly. Indeed, we very recently met with an MP who has a clear invested interest in this issue, and SEND children anyway, and we've directly lobbied to him. There is an absolute recognition that the position that we're in, it's underlined in the report, you've just articulated it yourself, it's an unsustainable position. It's unsustainable locally, it's unsustainable nationally, and essentially there needs to be reform in the system. Now, the indications are, from a national level, that there will be reform, but we're not in a position here and now to say definitively what that reform looks like, or indeed, well, when that reform will be enacted. The Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill is a separate entity, and the expectation is that gets passed in spring of this year. But what you're referring to is reform within the SEND system as a whole with regard to that legislation. And, you know, I can talk from a Worcestershire perspective, from a WCC perspective, but I'm equally confident that it's a fair summary from a national perspective, that all local authorities absolutely feel the need for this reform to be enacted. And like I say, the indications are certainly from the DFE and from government are that reform will come for the obvious reasons.
Following on from that thing, could you tell me when was the last time we actually sent a letter or to the Minister or the Secretary of State?
That would be round about a month ago, there or thereabouts. There's a follow-up letter that I'm actually in the process of drafting following a meeting that we very recently had with the local MP who has linked in with that minister. So around about 4 weeks ago, and imminently again. The lobbying, please be assured, the lobbying has absolutely happened, and not just via children's social care either. It's happened via our 151 officer, it's happened via our chief exec, it's happened via cabinet leader as well.
Thank you. Matt, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for your report. I think the key thing, I think, for me is obviously there's been a massive increase in the cost of home to school transport. I mean, over the past 5 years, it's over 300%. And you list a lot of the reasons behind that. I mean, the obvious one is there's a big over 800% increase in contracts going to independent schools. So I think my question is around, obviously, we've got this big increase because a lot of it is because we haven't got the provision that we are providing locally for children, so they have to go further and further. There's out of county as well. So you do mention later on about some, increases that we're making. I mean, firstly, I think it's obviously too late. We should have been looking at this earlier. But so I really want to focus on how do you think we could actually save money from the home to school transport by really pushing to actually increase the provision that we're providing across the county. Thank you.
Shall we come in with David first from a political perspective on that, and then we can come in with Adam afterwards?
Okay, I saw you looking at me there, Chairman. Yes, I'm happy to comment on that. If I can just add to Adam's comments to Brandon, the point he made. I mean, it's a really crucial point that you make, Brandon. And I think we have to be honest here that the previous government did not fund this sector sufficiently. And despite the lobbying that we did, and Adam's absolutely right, we are now taking it up with the current government. And we met with one of the new Labour members of Parliament recently, within the last couple of weeks. And I had a quiet word with him afterwards about this very thing to do with the legislation and to do with funding. And he has agreed to work with us to try and lobby from his perspective on our behalf. So I think at this stage we are doing everything that we possibly can. With the point of view with Matt, and the officers will give much further details on this, I think there is a two-pronged way of approaching the situation with home-to-school transport. You've heard from the E&I perspective and what the savings that they are making there within the difficulties which they have through route optimization, etc., and that of course will continue. But within the education department as well, we realise that there are very clearly savings to be made in terms of where our children and young people are provided with the services that they require. And I'm going to just very quickly explain. A couple of weeks ago, I visited a particular school, primary school, and up to 30% of some of the children there have an EHCP. And those children, I spent a lot of time in individual classrooms there. And those children were absolutely wonderful. I can't explain it appropriately, I think. They were fully integrated with all of their fellow classmates. And I have to say to you, had you just gone in there and sat there, you wouldn't have known which child was having special needs. For example, at times we all know certain children with EHCPs, and I'm talking about lower level EHCPs now, need a quiet spot to just take time out and chill and what have you. Well, they didn't just have one little area for that. Within each of the classrooms, they had about 6 individual sections. But it wasn't just the children with the HCPs that would use those areas. It was all children that would use those areas from time to time. So no child felt different from any other child there in terms of the needs that they required. And so what we're hoping to do and enhance from September of this year is to have more and more children with EHCPs of the lower level needs schooled at their local mainstream school. And to hopefully to explain to you how serious we are with this, we have a request for investment funding which will go to Cabinet in a couple of weeks' time and then to Council in the main budget full Council meeting for approval. And what we want to see is more and more of these children going to their local school. Of course, it will save money in terms of home-to-school transport by not transporting these children, in some cases halfway across the county, twice a day. But I truly believe that this was in the best interest of each of those children. It cannot be in their best interest, surely, for them to travel for up to an hour a day to a provision that they don't necessarily need. And therefore it must, that's 2 hours a day, out there, hour back. It must be better for them to be in their local school with their local friends and what have you. It works, I'm sure it works. Now, the one thing that we will desperately need here is the support, of course, of parents and carers to work with us. But I think it was Paul that said, it's always the child's best interest that comes first. And I just want to re-emphasize that point with you, if I may. None of this will be happening or would be happening if I didn't firmly believe that it is in the children's best interest to do what we're advocating to do. So I'll pass on to officers who will give more of the details. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we come into Adam, I just want to say this is something I've been quite vocal about as well, in terms of how do we help our young people have access to the education they need closer to home. That is the right thing for the child. And I'm saying that not just as a counsellor, but as a mum of a child who I ended up having to homeschool for a year because I couldn't get him into the local provision that he needed. So there's lots of people here who've had that experience. So I'm really glad we're going down here. What I want to know now is about those timescales, is how we can expedite it. Now, September, of course, is the beginning of next year, so of the next school year, so that makes sense. But of course, I want to see how we can maximise that too. We can reach as many schools as possible so that we can really roll this out, because there are children right now who desperately need this as we speak. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, panel, and thank you for the invite. Is it helpful, Chair, then, if I talk a little bit more about education, place planning, and the impact for transport? Yeah. I'll wind back slightly and just make reference to your question about housing growth and the housing growth that has been announced and expected over multiple years into the future, and I think it's important that we contextualise the growth in housing, and we plan in Worcestershire, we're planning and looking forward 10 years. It will be up to 10 years where you're trying to understand and plan and work with the district councils on where housing will be, how, and from that housing, how many children will live in particular housing developments and what their education needs might be. And we're currently just finalising a report now as well that will be going to Cabinet in a couple of weeks' time, as David talked about. One, in terms of infrastructure support from housing developers to make sure that we've got education funding available to expand and build schools. And then the Cabinet report in terms of education sufficiency and how that is our findings, our current findings, and our forecasting forward in terms of where we need places. So you asked about, the housing developments and the growth in housing expected, and are we planning for that transport now? The answer is a yes and a no. Yes, where we have got firm information about a housing development, the trajectory of the build of that housing development, and the secured infrastructure support into the future. It's really difficult to pin down exactly what you need and when, but there is quite a thorough system for doing that. And what you will also be aware of is when new housing developments are planned, when they meet a specific number of houses, then that does yield enough for potentially the building of a new school. And Fox Lydiate is an example of that in Redditch, where a new school is planned to be built over the coming years to meet housing demand, and really particularly going back to the points that it's really strongly felt here, which is in walking distance for children. I've been involved to an extent as my team in the design of that school, and there's been a real focus on making sure that that environment is appropriate for children with additional needs, albeit that some children will need to attend more specialist provision. So just coming back up to the looking forward in our education place planning, as I said, our sufficiency reports have been finalised. Those will be published. I think they will be published this week, actually, won't they? With a view to Cabinet on the 6th of February. And that will include a provision, our planning for provision from early years through to post-16. That's mainstream, because, of course, we're in a home to school transport meeting here, which is about all children's transport needs, and SEN provision. But specifically with our SEN provision, we've been working really closely with officers across the council and our members across the council to look at how we improve that, what we call a continuum of provision, but provision in many different ways to meet our youngest children with SEN needs, through to our children, through to our mainstream schools, and how the environment is right in a mainstream school for a child to be able, with additional needs identified, who may be attending, to be able to stay in that school. There's a project at Claines Primary School, which has been in the press recently, which is an investment from the council that improves their SEND provision. I think Councillor Chambers makes a good point that SEND provision and particular environments do actually serve all children as well. Through to then increasing our SEN, our SEND provision attached to mainstream, and then that report and the capital programme also includes the work around our special schools, particularly addressing our need, our highest demand at the moment, which is for children with social, emotional, mental health needs, and how we improve our access there to enable children to attend school closer to home in Worcestershire, because those are the children that we are seeing more frequently are actually having to be transported outside of the county.
Thank you. That was a really good in-depth answer. I really appreciate that. So I'm now going to go to Dan. Dan, you were next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a series of questions about point 15 on page 3. It goes into detail about the other factors that are causing increasing cost. I suppose the overall question on this one is, are these in order, these bullet points, of magnitude and importance? Because if they are we saying that the availability of local location and schools has the greatest impact? Are we saying that parental preference has the second greatest? If so, how many people are we talking here? How much money are we talking that's having an impact on? The next two, I'm a bit curious about, because although the percentages look huge, 805% increase, we're actually only talking about an increase from 17 contracts to 154. And actually, when you add up all of the out-of-county and independent schools, it's a total of 200 young people. So are we saying that 200 young people are having a greater impact on our budget than an increase due to fuel and drivers' wages? And are we also saying that they're having a greater increase, these 200 individuals are having a greater increase than the increase in cost for our taxi operators? Or are these in no particular order and I'm looking too much into this? I just feel like the numbers would have been useful here, just to get an understanding of exactly what's having the greatest impact, how much it's costing, and where that money is going. A full breakdown here is basically what I would have wanted here, so I could actually have done some analysis myself.
Oh, Nathan's upset because you stole his thunder. But there are some really good questions there. And actually, if we can include in that about, again, forecasting for the increase of national insurance contribution and minimum wage rise for our modelling for this year, I think that comes in with some of what he's just been asking.
Hi. They're not in any particular order, so they're not in. They're not in order of importance or effect. They're just the sort of issues we see that have a cumulative effect, and I think that's the point. There isn't one particular area you can point to and say it is definitely this is causing an effect, because they're all having an effect, and it's that cumulative effect that is increasing the budget. So yes, we have seen rises in fuel costs, we've seen rises in staff costs, we've seen the increase in the out-of-county contracts, and whilst it might be a small number, some of those costs are quite high because we are transporting children significant distance with passengers, etc., which have a particularly high cost. And one of the things is we use a lot of taxi operators, which you can see in the figures around how many taxis we use. We don't have taxis in every area of the county, so some of those are being drafted in from other areas of the county and having considerable amount of mileage before they even start the runs that we are paying for. So there is all of these having a cumulative effect. As to which one certainly has the most effect, obviously the availability of places is probably one of the higher ones, but we could look at a sort of breakdown if that is sort of required.
You want to come back on that one?
Sorry to be an academic on this one, but it's just one of those that when someone gives me a series of bullet points, the assumption is always that at the top, that's where we kind of would be looking to say, right, those have the greatest impact. I just feel in future, this happened to me a few times where I've been in scrutiny meetings, if we can at least put in no particular order or something that actually gives us something that we can work to, it just makes it a lot easier. But I still really do want to know these numbers, because I'm hearing there's a lot of factors here, but I'm not hearing actually what the factors, how much they're costing us.
Adam, you want to come back on that one?
sort of come back on that one. Yeah, there's already been the pledge that absolutely you'll get that breakdown and that will be supplied. I think I just wanted to pick up on a couple of bits as well, because I know that you referenced national insurance and national minimum wage. And again, without wanting to steal thunder with regard to presentation of the budget later on, absolutely. Both of those have been factored in with regard to the budget ask going forward. And I think as well, just going back to Councillor Boatwright's question, whilst they're not in any particular order, there are some standout things there for me when you look at proportionality. So, for example, 75% of homeschool transport contracts relate to mainstream children. But when you look at those children subject to EHCPs and how those numbers have so dramatically risen, and it's there, it's in the report, 805% increase. You know, these are factors that absolutely we can't ignore, and I think they also relate to previously asked questions and previous statements that have been made as well, both with regard to education sufficiency and indeed with regard to the need for reform going forward. So it's essentially interlinked.
Perfect, thank you. And Nathan, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good morning, everybody. Absolutely agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Boatwright-Green, who did steal my thunder and asked a very pertinent question. I think it's absolutely important that if we're going to do a deep dive into this particular and very important area, then I think we need to understand how these eye-watering numbers are arrived at. So I was going to ask a very similar question. I think it's incumbent on us to understand the breakdown of the costs. In particular, I was very interested to know, and maybe there's not an answer now, but if we get it in the fullness of time, those contracts that are outside of county, what percentage of the overall cake does that make up? Because I suspect that's quite a large chunk of the cost, the overall costs. So if we could have that, I think that would be really, really important. Just on the costs, because obviously it says here inflationary increases in both fuel and driver wages are important. And I would agree with that. But, and there is a bit of a but in that, we've seen a decrease in fuel costs. And I went on the RAC website just to have a look at the cost of the pump price over the last 4 to 5 years. And it said for diesel, average price, so if we go back to June 2020, we were looking on average about £1.14 for diesel. That shot up to June 22 to an average in the country of £1.98. So you would understand that if you go into the budget, you would then see in about 21-22 a real increase in the costs. Understand that. But we've seen a steady decline in the pump price since then. April 24, for example, £1.56, and January 25 we're down to £1.44. So the price is coming down quite considerably, but the prices that we are being charged or probably invoiced, I suspect aren't coming down. So I'd like a comment on that, please. But I will change tact in terms of another pertinent question. And it centres around the criteria for SEND, please, because obviously I read that we have 6,771 pupils with SEND as part of the home to school transport, of which about 40%, 2,700, are the home to school transport. So just for clarity, do those pupils with SEND automatically have the right to a home to school transport, whether they take it up or not? And if they don't, then who decides on the criteria for that? And a side question to that is, if they decide on the criteria, how do they factor in the role and the responsibility of the parents, please, as well?
Okay, there's two different questions. Probably one's going to go to Paul and the other one to Daniela. So do you want to, or Stuart, do you want to take the part about the cost of fuel first, and then we'll go on to Daniela about the actual who gets homeschool transport on AHCP and who doesn't?
One of the reasons we've sort of overachieved on the savings this time is because we are actually levering those factors about the fuel coming down. So we've started to see reductions in costs for journey lengths and times as we go through the tendering process, as we start reviewing those contracts. We've actually seen we had a spike a few years ago in terms of where the fuel was, but we are now seeing the contract costs, the actual mileage costs, start to come down. The problem is obviously we still got the growth factor on top of that, so it's not resonating in the budget, if you like. But if you actually look at the individual costs compared to the contracts of similar, you actually start to see that coming down slightly. But obviously the factors of the amount of out-county transport in the independent country, sort of hide that if you look at it as a global picture, but if you look at it in the detail.
Hiya. So the transport policy is available. It's more complex than just saying if you have SEND, you receive it or you don't. There are a number of factors that are at play, so things like age, the local school, what schools they can attend, whether there is parental preference involved. So each case is done on their individual merit as such, and the conversations that have to take place before that. So there's a number of demographics we have to understand. There's a distance to those schools. There's the understanding around whether we've identified a local school closer, yet parental preference takes them outside of that. So because of these number of factors, I can't just say, yes, you have any HCP, you will receive homeschool transport. There's quite an extensive policy that sits around that.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that? No. I wanted to ask kind of a follow-up on the, it was kind of to do with we talked about taxi numbers, and some areas don't have taxis. And one thing I'm always interested in, how do we grow the cake? Not just how do we split up the cake, but how do we grow that cake? So if we know we actually do need to have more taxi companies in order to fulfil more local contracts, but also to keep the cost down, how are we supporting our districts in helping to grow those numbers of taxi drivers, if that's indeed what you're saying we need?
We've done a bit of work in trying to attract new operators. So we've done quite a lot about, there are operators in some areas that have never worked for the council and stuff like that. So we did a bit of work on trying to, extol the benefits of coming to work for us. So we have increased the number of operators on our framework over the sort of last couple of years. We've been doing some of that ourselves. So we've looked at where we can operate smaller vehicles, and we're actually starting to do that with our internal fleet in some of those areas where we find it challenging, using our own resources. We talked to our district colleagues, the taxi and licensing, and there was quite a dip after sort of COVID in the number of taxi drivers, but that is starting to increase. So we are, we talk to the districts on a regular basis about taxi licensing and about, what we can do. We obviously have done a bit of work in terms of finding taxi companies that haven't previously worked for us and whether they want to come onto our improved framework. Obviously that comes with a few challenges, because to work for us there are a lot of things around safeguarding and additional training and extra things that some companies are quite willing to do and other companies don't want to go down that sort of route. But we're continuing to look at ways to increase the number of operators, but obviously some of the stuff we're doing now is actually doing it, can we do it ourselves as well in those areas when we know we've got particular challenges.
Thank you very much. And we're going to go over to Mel next, and then it will be Alistair. We haven't forgotten about you, don't worry.
Chair, thank you. Again, I guess it's a bit of a theme, isn't it? Just obviously looking at the EHCPs and pupils attending independent schools has risen by 805% over 6 years, and the same for out-of-county settings, having risen by 117.5% over 6 years. I mean, these are huge numbers. And my personal sense is that leadership at the council hasn't been doing enough, and it's really good to see progress now on the report, particularly from a Worcester point of view, and myself seeing the increased provision at Regency. But obviously the report also talks about parental preferences, But I know with regards to Worcester provision, particularly with, I know we're not supposed to talk about particular schools, so I won't, but there is certainly a shortage and there is much demand in Worcester, and which I guess reflects across the county. But I just want to know, are we really going to make progress, and are we going to have more schools for pupils with special educational needs? Because until we do that, we're going to continue spending all this money and time sending pupils to inappropriate locations, really, and it makes their day really long for them as well. Thank you.
Over to you, Adam.
To a degree, I sort of revert to Sarah Wilkins' comments earlier on in terms of what she was referring to with regard to place planning, school development, etc. And again, I won't name specific schools. There are developments that are underway. They will be online come 2027 as well, where there will be more specialist provision that's available as well. There's an absolute focus on. There are examples up and running now, but an absolute focus on seeking expressions of interest from mainstream schools with regard to adapting their schools to have specialist units attached to them, and that will continue. To a degree, I'm sort of hamstrung by the fact that we haven't yet had that cabinet meeting to talk explicitly about education sufficiency, which is not me trying to kick the can down the road, far from it. In many respects, it may be that we have more that we can comment on overtly thereafter, but we're not currently in that position. So I guess the really broad answer to your question is, are we confident that we will have more sufficiency to avoid external outer-county independent use? Yes. Are we confident that will be adequate sufficiency? No. No. And it would be disingenuous to suggest that would be the case. I think the situation will be better. I think there is absolute focus on that. I think there has been for some time. There continues to be. But again, without, and I don't want to sound like a bore unnecessarily, but you can't look at one facet of this without linking it in to the other facets of this. So again, this links into that national cry for reform, and indeed the indication that there will be reform as well.
So I'd like to bring the cabinet members in on this, because of course there is a really what we're looking for here is that reassurance of that invest to save, that capital to put all this investment in where we might not get enough money from 106s or from the Department of Education. If we as a council are going to go, yes, this is important, are we as the council, are you guys going to be able to give us that reassurance of that capital money? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I take Mel's point, obviously. You mentioned invest to save. I think not many people would have thought that we would have been putting this to Cabinet and then to full Council in the next couple of weeks, whereby we're asking Council to invest money into this area so that in the long term we will be able to save money. As regards the availability of places in special schools today, of course, what I'm hoping is that by starting this new policy and increasing it year on year on year, whereby more and more children with the lower level needs go to their local school, their local mainstream school, that will release some of the pressure on our current special schools. It will have an obviously knock-on effect, which is where I think the investment that we're hoping for, and I'm confident will come forward, will help us to expand where necessary in the mainstream schools. But I think, Chairman, you mentioned a point earlier which I just want to pick up and just agree entirely with you. I think your inference was that by more and more of children going to their local school, that is good for all children, not just the children with the EHCPs, but it's good for those children that do not have an EHCP, where all of our children, wherever possible, are integrated together as one. They grow up in those early years together. And I think that is such a potential positive outcome of all of this.
I absolutely agree. Thank you. I'm going to come in with Alistair. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. You'll be not surprised that I'm going to be a bit controversial. I've been studying this for 2 years now, hours and hours and hours. It was first flagged to us in November 2022 that there was a pressure on home to school transport purely because of send children. And just to give you some of the figures, the budget for 2023-24 was 21 million to home to school. We were £9 million over budget at the end of last year. So what we then did, when we introduced the new budget, we added 5 million to it. So the new budget's 35 million. And then the outturn at the end of this year is going to be 3 million. So totally, that's 18 million since the budget of last year. And this is an annual cost. And let's consider, it is just on transport. And if you dig down into the figures, you'll see a lot of it is taxis. So if you want to get rich in Worcestershire, buy a taxi firm. Some of the taxis, if you go onto Google and put in spend by the council over £5,000, you get a list of every single supplier to the council and how much we're spending. Here is just taxis, 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 taxis. From my quick calculations, it's over £1.5 million a month we're spending on taxis. If you look at the report, it's not clear. And I agree with Nathan and I agree with Dan. It's a very poor report. There's no clarity. There's no statistics. All right, you've got the variety in your table 1, talks about the outturn, reported outturn. You've got things like on table 4, it talks about pupils transported. Then the next table 5, it's about forms. And then it talks in table 6, it talks about contracts. But let's just have a look at the figures. 18 million. The average cost for a SEND child is just running under £10,000 a year to transport them. 18 million divided by 10,000 is 1,800 additional SEND children. We don't have an extra 1,800 SEND children. It's about 300. So where has the 18 million gone? Okay, let's have a look at a different way. £18 million, average cost of a taxi fare, what do you think? £100, is that fair? If that was, that'd be 180,000 taxis, journeys. If it was £200 per taxi fare, it would be 90,000 taxi rides. All right? Something's going amiss. Something is not right. And the other thing is, and I totally agree with the public speaker and with David, that with the public speaker spending 3 to 4 hours in a taxi isn't good for the child. And I totally agree with David that the best thing for our children is to put them into the schools closest to them. But if we're looking at what this agenda item is, transport, something's amiss. And we need clarity. And we need to make sure that you have all those figures, the trends over the last 3 years. And one of the things we have what we're spending with taxis. And when I say taxis, that includes the minibus taxis, some of them coming from Birmingham or Coventry to come in and take our children. How much is with community transport? All right, because community transport is a fantastic opportunity for this county, and we could use them and benefit. But how much goes to the community transport? And then we have our own transport. We have 50 minibuses, 50 drivers, 50 support staff at Warden. What's happening with them? So we need to have that clarity, the breakdown. How many SEND children each year? Over the last 5 years, to see how it's grown, how many of those we transport, how much we're spending with taxis, how many we're spending with our own people, how many we're spending with community transport. Let's get the figures. Because if we really are saying that £18 million that we're spending since 2024, or 23-24 budget, the figures just don't add up.
Who wants to respond to that one?
I think we draw straws.
Go on, Paul, you got the short straw.
There's a lot in there, isn't there? I think, and I think just in terms of the facts for the budget. So, budget setting's key, isn't it, in terms of the financial restraints we've got. So, predicting transport growth and the implications of that growth, determining where it is really difficult. But you know, we always submit robust, accurate budgets. Now, I mean, in terms of individual contracts, they can vary tremendously. So let's go back to the clients we convey with complex needs. Some of those may have 2 passenger assistants. They may be out of county. There may be health issues which need to be legislated for on the contract. So as we said in the report, this isn't linear. This isn't going from Pershore to Evesham on a Saturday for 15 quid. It is very, very different. So I think what you've got to take into account is the percentage of growth, but the complexity behind those individual contracts. You know, this isn't a uniform cost per contract. So, you know, let's just explain the process. So when they arrive in our world, legally, we have to convey that child to their educational setting. Fait accompli. As I said in our report, we then need to consider the needs of the child. So when the child lands in our world for transport, in collaboration with our children's services partners, this is about the child. So if we accept the child's got to be conveyed from Worcestershire to a setting which is not insignificant in terms of journey time, we need to make sure once that child comes into our care, we do the right thing in terms of the appropriate vehicle, the appropriate support, safeguarding. There's a number of things when they come into our care, we need to be fundamentally managing all of those aspects. For me, it's quite straightforward. We've got a number of contracts. We know the contract rate per contract, which gives us the overall budget figure. So it isn't linear, so you can't do one size fits all engaging those. We've got, you know, Alistair referred to community transport. You know, just to reassure Alistair, we're advocates of community transport. Community transport is small beer in terms of what they can provide in terms of resources. Now, we've worked with community transport. Let's not forget they were grant funded a number of years ago, 100%. We've worked with them over the last 10 years, so they're now more on a commercial footing. So they actually bid for work in terms of transport, as I alluded to earlier. They do demand responsive transport, they do public transport, they do home to school transport. So they've been on a journey, but you know, just to manage expectation, there's the level they can go to. So, you know, do we work with them to expand and support? Absolutely. Are they going to be the silver bullet to resolve this problem? Categorically no. But they're part of it. And as Adam was talking to earlier on in terms of the number of facets, there are a number of facets in the transport world which are, you know, varied by definition and complex. And I think what Alistair's referring to in the database you look at, and I've asked this to be looked at, that gives you a cost of, well, once it gives you a cost of transport from a global figure, maybe by contract, but that doesn't relate to taxi contracts. That's a global figure which includes home to school transport, mainstream, public transport. So I've already asked Audit last week to clarify that position and come back with the correct categorisations because it's misleading. So I think that work is already underway. Had that conversation last week because if you look at it, like Alistair has, why wouldn't you think that was factually correct? There's some work to do there, I think, to make sure that it's categorised in the right element. So you see the true taxi cost and the true home to school transport cost for minibuses. So that's already being done, clarified that last week. So I think, you know, this is about bona fide growth. We know the numbers. There's a question mark in terms of where the settings do they go to. There's an element of which vehicle is the most suitable. And, you know, there is an increase in taxes, but that's based on where the child may live. You know, let's not forget that we're really, really good, and we don't blow our own trumpet, but I'll make an exception. We're really, really good at route optimization and scheduling. Numbers speak for themselves. What we can't do is mitigate where the child lives and the setting it needs to go to. If it's more cost effective to send an individual taxi to Tembury to take them into Worcester, then to be honest, there isn't a lot we can do about that. As Stuart said, we've worked with operators, we've done market shaping sessions to try and augment provision in various areas. We want to improve commerciality. From a commercial perspective, we look at areas which we've got a heat map to say commercial provision could be better, so we deploy fleet into that space. So we do use, you know, 50-50 contracts with fleet. Primarily, they do wheelchair accessible minibus transport because the market isn't really strong in that space, so we do it. So, you know, that's really cost effective. As Stuart said, we're looking at smaller vehicles to be used from a market moderation perspective for taxis where it's poor. So there's a number of things we do, but fundamentally, this relates to growth.
Thank you. Talking about wheelchair accessible vehicles, I actually have a gentleman who's approached me because he just needs somewhere to park vehicles because he wants to buy wheelchair accessible vehicles, but he can't park them outside his house. So how can we, you know, that's one thing I'd love to talk to you maybe away from here, is how can we actually support that business in going, well, yeah, we desperately need actually more wheelchair accessible vehicles, so how can we help them with that? One thing, I will come back to you in a minute, one thing I would like to raise is it has been suggested by quite a few people now that we do want to do a deeper dive into the figures actually. So if those figures are more sensitive and confidential in nature, I would like to recommend, if the panel agrees, that we have a more members briefing, which is a confidential setting where we can actually deep dive into those figures. Is that something the panel's okay? If we make that as a recommendation then on this, that we do that, and it can be in a few weeks after you've got more of that audit data back for us to look at. Now, I've got you down, Alistair, again. Did you want to come back on this one, or?
Yeah, basically, I think that's an excellent idea. I've been asking for this information for 2 years. You want it broken down for at least 3 years, so you can see the trends. You want to see how it's broken down between taxis, how it's broken down through our own vehicles, which are 50 of them, and also how it's broken down to community transport. All right, and let's have a look at it. And also, let's have a look at it. The council has a very good accountancy system. We know exactly how much we pay every supplier. All right. We also know at a school level which children are actually going on our own transport. Okay, so we've got all the information. You know, we can build a sort of like a bell curve. We know that some children might cost £20,000–30,000 a year, but we also know some children are probably costing us only, you know, £1,000–2,000 a year. So we can build that. We need a transparency. We need clarity. We need to know what the officers have done since November 22, when it was first flagged up that we were overspending our budget. What actions did they take from November 22 till now to try and reduce the costs? And it seems to me that a lot of it has just been pick the phone up and give another one to a taxi. And if that is happening, we're not making best use of taxpayers' money. And at the end of the day, as a council, we must make sure we're spending taxpayers' money efficiently, and I don't think we have.
Thank you.
Last thing, can I join you on the meeting, please?
Yeah, I think we'll be able to make it between the two panels. Did you want to, Paul?
Yeah, no, thank Alistair for his points, but I would like to give the panel and Scrutiny reassurance. We simply don't just pick up the phone and order a taxi. We do rolling reviews. If contracts change, we don't wait for 12 months to review that contract. We do that as in when. And I think, you know, I'm not an advocate saying, oh, you know, look what we've done. History is history. But if you look at the last 10 years, we saved £1 million. The challenge and the ask is increased, hasn't it? which is why we say £1.6 million. £1.6 million is by prudent management of the transport network. That's the only way that figure is produced. So I think, happy to share those figures, but let's be really clear on what that ask is, so we can, in terms of resource, we can dedicate a bit of resource to do it, because it's a very small team. Let's be really clear about the ask, and then we can provide that information. We've provided information in the past, but let's be clear of the ask. But I just wanted to make the point that it isn't, you know, it's not. This isn't poor management. This is about demand.
Thank you. Now, I am really conscious of time because we have got to get onto the budget, and there are a lot of people who still want to ask questions. Tony, will come to you. Please try and keep it short and sweet if we can now, so we can get through as much as possible.
You can tell that me and Alistair have spent plenty of time on this because he spoke in the exact same order that I have it listed as well. I thank everyone all the time for actually working on this. I've been banging on about this since I first joined the council 8-9 years ago. Me and Alistair have been banging on about this for 4 years, and suddenly everyone's an expert on it. First, Paul and the team, I think you are doing a fantastic job. I have sat down with you and I've worked through it, and you are making savings, but there is a long way to go. There's still a long way to go. Regarding the deep dive, you can't deep dive in a scrutiny meeting. It's not possible. It's too big. It's too complex. Specific members need to have a specific thing. Speak to the officers. Have a separate meeting. Dig in as deep as you can. You can't dig in. There's layers. I can ask Paul one question, and he'll give me an answer, and then I'll have 10 more, and then there'll be 20 more. You can't do that in a scrutiny meeting. It's not possible. So if people really care and really want to get into this, you've got to have those separate meetings. You've got to give up the time and really deep dive and be specific. You can't be generalistic. Yeah, the route planning, optimisation, you're doing a fantastic job at it, but there's a long way to go. This budget is just mental. Vehicles. About a year ago, I asked, have we increased the use of our own fleet? Have we increased our own fleet? Schools. I asked, are we using school vehicles? Because they're parked up at this time. They're minibuses, they're cars. That's our own schools and also academy schools. So I'd like to know what work's been done on that. Community transport, I'm glad it got picked up. Alistair wouldn't, there's no chance that Alistair would miss off mentioning community transport. So I'll just add on to that. Always support our community transport and help them not only be able to fulfil these contracts, but do the little bits of support, because most of these just do it out of the goodness of their heart. So yeah, my points are own fleet, school fleet. Has it improved in 12 months since I last asked?
We have increased some of the work we're doing with our own fleet, but that has been around the smaller vehicles because that's where we've really got the challenge in terms of, obviously you've seen the amount of taxis, so we're trying to look at whether we can do some of that more cost effective using our own resources. So we have increased the size of sort of our smaller fleet. We have spoken to schools. That is still ongoing. There hasn't been any particular progress. There are some challenges in terms of the licensing and insurance and various other things. But we are speaking to the schools, and a few schools have sort of indicated they would be interested. So that's still an ongoing piece of work.
Thank you. On that, I mentioned earlier actually to Adam about us being able to help schools with lift shares. Now, we help schools support them if they want to do walking buses, cycle buses, but actually lift shares. And now I know that won't help the homeschool transport budget as a huge amount. However, it really helps when you're going to go and drop off your kid if there's less people there because you've got four children now in one car. I'd be quite happy to put my name on the lift share at my local school, but if we can do some work around supporting schools to be able to do that, I think that would really, really help just with the whole actual commute rather than maybe the budget. So I'll let you come, we'll come back on that on another time. I don't think we need an answer on it right now, but I've got Matt, Andrew, Adrian and Brandon, and that is then it on this because we need to move on to the next thing.
Thank you, Chair. Try and be quick. Certainly issues that Tony and Alistair raised about transport, clearly increase in demand, going to be an increase in cost. Increase their price, they put the price up, there's more demand, it's not surprising, and obviously but I think there's that side of things, but I think fundamentally for me, I think it goes back to the provision. The reason why we're sending lots of people dotted all around the county and out of the county is because we just don't have enough provision nearby. Just want to come back on Cabinet Member Chambers' point about going to a school and seeing 30% of the pupils being EHCP and being, that's good in the sense that inclusion is a good thing, but I think for me, it shows that maybe there shouldn't be 30% going into a primary school. That's because there just isn't the places provided elsewhere. So I think it would have been lovely to have this, the sufficiency report that's coming next week, because I think that will play into us looking at home to school transport. Because if we've got sufficiency, that will immediately reduce the home to school transport, and then we can look into the individual costs. But just reducing the number is key. So. One particular question then is just about obviously the new schools that are coming up. We might find more in a cabinet report, but obviously there is a new school that's planned right by the hospital. How much kind of SEND provision can we put into that school? Because I think if we can kind of say from our perspective, from our panel, we think that school should have quite a bit of SEND provision. So how can we kind of increase that and look at the demographics of what's needed there? Thank you.
Sarah, if you could come back on that, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take this one. Previous sufficiency reports will show, and not wanting to steal the thunder of the sufficiency report that is coming, is that in Worcestershire, our numbers of children with EHCPs is broadly in line, and that increase is broadly in line with what's seen nationally. What's important to note in Worcestershire, as in previous years and will be the case this year, that our number of children with those plans that are in there are 10 mainstream schools remains lower than national average. That figure has improved, and our number of children attending special schools is still higher than national average, but is also in going in the right direction. And obviously the Cabinet paper shows that and the detail behind it. So the importance of the right provision for our children, that development of provision, be it the environment of a mainstream school, provision specific for children attached to a mainstream school, or indeed special schools, we need to keep working on that balance. And so I think what we will see coming forward, and Councillor Jenkins is right, you want to look at the sufficiency report and then the action plan with it. We just need to make sure that we're looking across the whole of the piece. In terms of any new provision, really importantly, yes, we're looking at that with specifically making sure that the environments are right for children with additional needs. In fact, just on Fox Lydia, it's worth saying that the current building bulletin for the development of mainstream schools, we've adapted and gone beyond that in that design to make sure that the environment is as we would want that to be for children with additional needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so it's Andrew, please.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier in the meeting, our Cabinet member responsible spoke of a plan from September 25 onwards to have more children with lower EHCP requirements educated within local mainstream schools. I'd be very keen to hear what work we are doing with all local schools to evaluate their desire and ability to provide additional SEN educational provision within the county.
I think that was answered earlier in that they've asked schools to put in a statement of interest. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Adam?
That's what I was referring to earlier. So there was an example of a school recently who's done just that. There's an expression of interest where we're consulting schools specifically with regard to adding on additional units to those mainstream school facilities. So when Councillor Chambers was referring to that and referring to inroads being made and progress being made, that's what that was a reference to.
Do you want to come back on that? Because Sarah wants to come in on that too. Do you want to hear from Sarah first and then you?
Thank you. It's really important for us to understand and appreciate the provision of a good quality education experience for children isn't just about a building and environment, it's about the culture and the quality of teaching and learning. And so the national approach in terms of teaching is something termed quality first teaching that teaches for our children with additional needs in that there's a benefit for all. So every state-funded school in the country has the external regulation by Ofsted. That is part of the Ofsted framework is to look at the identification, assessment and provision for our children. So without going further into that, it is really important that it is the whole experience. It is about the culture of the organisation, the framework by which it is required to deliver a curriculum. And we all know there are constraints in that. There is a government review on the curriculum, the quality of that, the teaching and learning, the environment, and then for some of for children it is about having that particular specialist provision. And some of our children do need, of course, really very significant physical adaptations to the environment that, again, the council continues to fund and support as to the DFE.
So you happy with that, or do you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the background. I have some experience, family member who is a teacher at an SEN school in London. But in terms of the engagement, what I'd love to hear is, was that a batch sample? Or I'd like to hear about how this engagement is evaluated itself, because there have been other local school teachers saying that they would be able to accommodate more pupils in mainstream if they didn't have to divert resources, and that they felt that they weren't able to achieve effectively, cost effectively, and or space efficiently and resource efficiently the valid needs that need to be met for pupils with SEN. So the question would be, are we just hearing, how wide are we casting the net when we're doing this engagement? Because some people seem to have contrary views to what was very, very well put that today, a lovely sounding plan, but I'm just aware that there's people who, in the industry, who are disagreeing.
Okay, Sarah, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think, in short, how do we communicate, or how far do we communicate with our schools in terms of, one, evaluating the provision, academy and LA maintained. It is right across the sector, so we hold what's called an SEND profile of each of our state-funded schools. In terms of the engagement, we do that right across the sector. There isn't a school that we don't engage with. Does that mean that you've got everybody at the same stage, every school at the same stage in terms of its capability, environment, culture to deliver a high quality education and meet all children's needs at the right time? No, we haven't, and there won't be a local authority area in this country that has. Have we made improvements to that? Yes, we have. And we can see that in a range of ways. But your question, was about how far do we cast this net? We go out across our whole school sector through our LA maintained schools that we have a clear direct relationship with, and then our multi-academy trusts. I meet with chief executive officers of the multi-academy trusts on a six weekly basis. So we've got a good communication network.
Thank you. Over to Adrian, please.
This hopefully will be brief, Chairman. It strikes me on the question of taxes and transport generally. There is unease by the panel, and thanks for asking me to speak since I'm not a member of the panel, over, in effect, the contracting and commercial competition aspect of this. So that when, as Nathan said, fuel prices drop really quite dramatically, I suppose some 30%, is that picked up? It's a genuine competition. I mean, I seem to remember some years ago there were 5 building firms who were operating in effect, were operating as a cartel. And I think we need some reassurance that our taxi companies are not acting in a way that would be against the public interest. And is our own fleet providing enough challenge to the commercial sector? My suggestion would be that since you've already got internal auditors looking at this, you refer this to the audit panel to have a look at, or possibly the commercial and change panel, because Nathan would seem to have a bit of experience of this, and then you can have a bit of a deep dive with the auditors and bring it back. Just on the question of sufficiency, Chairman, if I may, I mean, the trouble is the 10-year planning time frame is actually not very long, where if you're trying to build a new special school, I think the new one in Malvern has probably taken us 14 years to get over the line. And the other thing that I would just remind, there is a bit of education trends over a number of years have been flowed really against, I've been on this council long enough to remember when every high school basically had a specialist unit in it, but because of the inclusion programme, it was deemed that they were probably not the best way to go forward with this, and quite a number of them were closed. But it strikes me that, looking back 15 years, that was probably an error.
I think there's a political statement in there that the officers can't answer, but yeah, Paul.
No, thank you. I'd like to thank Adrian for his questions. It gives an opportunity to provide just a bit of clarification, I guess. So, we're very aware it's the public purse, and, in that regard, we use a system, dynamic purchasing system, which is monitored with our corporate colleagues. So every contract we go out to the market for is managed via that process. There's obviously award criteria. There's a robust specification, and then that's all recorded and visible. And I think all I'd add to that is last year internal audit did look at that process, and obviously it's deemed to be a fit for purpose process. And the final point, I guess, I would like to reiterate, if there are any contractual changes we're aware of, and we then do go back to the market to review a contract. So I'll give you a quick example. So if it's a contract transporting 10 people, 2 of those people leave, we will then go back and say the route mileage has now changed, therefore we expect a reduction in cost. So there is prudent management of the contracts. There is visibility from a procurement perspective with our colleagues in the centre. So just to provide that reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, the last question on this, because we do need to move on to the budget, is with Brandon.
Thank you, Chair. Means I started, now we're going to finish it. But mine is not a question, it's a comment, really, because I think Councillor Muir brought it up very well and eloquently, and I don't think I could surpass what he said about the transport, because to look at the all different types of transport and what we're actually doing, I think is going to be a good thing, because when I look at these figures here, and it's been mentioned a number of times about the pressures of the capacity which is going to grow, because that's the way it happens with the amount of people coming into the county. And I think it's a case of, if we don't look at this, next year we'll be sitting there doing exactly the same thing, looking at a 5 or 10 million increase to this particular budget on this particular subject. So it's going to be interesting when it comes back, so we can actually all have a better insight into actually where we're actually going as a council for this particular thing.
I agree, and I think that brings us nicely onto the points of recommendations. One, I think, would be prudent here is to make sure this comes back to us within, a reasonable period of time. But before that comes back to this panel, that we do those deep dives that we have spoken about, and that we also maybe record our support of the Invest to Save, because that seems to have backing from all of us, should I say, so that we can make sure that that's actually recorded to go to Cabinet, that we do want to heavily endorse that, so that we can have more provision local to the schools. So anybody who is not part of this panel, you are free to go, unless you really do want to stay and discuss our budget. I think you've had budget before. Thank you very much to speakers. Obviously you can go. We will move on to the panel now. Obviously I would like to bring David and Steve in to talk about the budget too, because I know, Steve, you haven't had a chance to say anything yet, and we don't want to keep you quiet. So give everyone a second to change. You can stay, Adam. Of course you can, because I'm sure we're going to have questions for you. So please do. Thank you ever so much for everyone's time. Really do appreciate it. Okay, so just as everyone's changing over, we are going to be on budget scrutiny. So just to introduce the people we've got here. Okay. So I would like to welcome Steph. You are there. You're sat behind. I was going to say, I've got you down here. You are there. Brilliant. That's perfect. We've got everybody's in place. So, Steph, would you like to kick us off on this? Thank you.
Will do. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, panel. This is the fifth scrutiny panel, so I apologise to those colleagues who have heard this once or twice before. But what I am proposing to do, with Chairman's permission, is to do a quick run through the Council's overall financial position, then take a pause in case there's any questions around the whole, and then I'll focus on the children's elements. And obviously myself and the DCS will be able to answer any specific questions there might be about the remit of this panel and what this panel would like to feed up to overview and scrutiny panel prior to the Cabinet meeting that's coming up on the 6th of February. So I'll start with the overall financial position. You've heard this, I'm sure, through the press, through myself, and also through those of you who are listening to or attending Cabinet. Local government is seeing severe financial pressure due to inflationary pressures and demand. And we've heard today significantly about home to school transport. That is one of our areas of demand. And also social care and adult social care, particularly placements. At the end of October in the current financial year, our budget was forecast to overspend by 14.2 million, and that's after using 7.9 of budgeted use of reserves. We're looking at that in what element of that is going to continue into next financial year. So obviously, if we're talking about placements and children receiving transport, it's likely that they will continue into next financial year. So we're classing that as a net recurrent pressure. And that net recurrent pressure into next year is in the region of 15.3 million. We are indeed making savings in the current financial year, and 75% of those savings are on track to be delivered by the end of the financial year. So there's a couple of areas that are not on track, and we've reflected those also in next year's budget. So the next couple of slides, pages for you in your pack, gives you some financial information, some numbers. So for those of you who like numbers and charts, the information is in there for you. I won't go through those line by line. I am minded of time and want to give the panel opportunity to ask questions. So the current financial information as was at period 7, and we will be presenting the Q3 position when we go to Cabinet next month. So the key headlines for 25-26, these were in detail in the Cabinet report of the 16th of January, and it details every directorate line by line. And this was based on the local government settlement which came out on the 18th of December, which again was a one-year settlement, which makes financial planning very difficult for a local authority to deliver a medium-term financial plan when the settlement is only 1 year. However, the government have indicated that from 26-27 we will have a multi-year settlement, which is really welcome news for local authorities up and down the country. Central government gave us additional funding, or indicated we were getting additional funding of 17.6 million, which was 12.6 million more than we'd got in our medium-term financial plan. But the majority of that was in a new guise called the Extended Producer Responsibilities, which is relating to waste. So adults and children's social care funding went up by 8.3 million in totality for adults and children, and 1.7 million additional grant for children's services in the new grant for children's prevention. Nationally, there was an indication of a £600 million recovery grant, but Worcestershire did not receive an element of that. There's only one county council in the country that has received an element, and that's Lancashire. The majority of local authorities are in the north who's received that, and the majority are Mets or unitaries, but Worcestershire has not received anything from that. The County Council has identified £12.5 million worth of savings for the 25-26 financial year, of which 4.2 million are the full year effect from existing year savings rolled into next financial year. And we are seeing continuing pressures in demand relating to services, and these are being exacerbated by increases in national minimum wage and changes to employers' national insurance contributions. And this budget tries to attempt to mitigate an element, if not all, of those pressures going forward. When we've looked at every area of demand, every area of income and our service savings, the budget gap at the time of writing was 48.6 million. We are proposing to reduce that on a one-off basis by 15 million by use of one-off reserves, leaving an unmitigated budget gap of 33.6 million. And that's also predicated on a proposed council tax of 4.99%, which is 2% for adult social care and 2.99% for general. And that's the maximum that the local authority can do without referendum or Secretary of State permission. So you'll see on the next slide the council tax that's benchmarked with our county council comparators, and we are in the lower quartile and the third lowest of county councils we compare with, and it's likely that that position will stay very, very similar as we go forward, as every local authority is likely to put their council tax up by the maximum or close to that. So moving on to the key headlines relating to what the government has indicated for local governments in situations similar to Worcestershire, that they have said that they will consider requests from any local authority who's concerned about its financial position or ability to set or maintain a balanced budget. It's really important, that term, maintain a balanced budget, because it's one thing to set a budget, it's the second thing to stay within it and maintain it. So the request for support has gone in from Worcestershire County Council through for what's known as a capitalisation directive, and this is a permission to borrow. It's not a grant from central government, they don't allocate us cash. It's the ability to get a loan to pay for our day-to-day expenditure. So it's basically like putting our day-to-day expenditure on our credit card. We have to pay it, and we have to pay it back with interest. It's not a recurrent solution. It gives us some time to consider reducing our expenditure, reshaping what we do, and time to consider long-term solutions. We have set up spend control boards. We are very good at looking and challenging expenditure, but we've tightened these up a little bit over the last 6 months, and we have put into place spend control boards, and these are relating to recruitment, capital procurement, as well as placements within adults and children's social care. This is to ensure we have a whole council view of each directorate, because if you've got a recruitment request in one of the teams, you might find somewhere else within the council they're doing a realignment and they can move posts around the organisation rather than recruit to vacancies. So that's one example of the panels that are being chaired by the Chief Exec. So again, for those of you who like numbers, there's a couple of charts and paragraphs with numbers in, which indicate each of the key directorate areas, growth and pressures for 25-26, a detail of our grants and how those grants are proposing to change by the draft settlement that we've received, and also a breakdown of the savings. The savings in total are given in the budget report appendix 2A and 2B, but I will go into the children's savings in a little bit more detail when I come on to the children's element. So moving just very slightly onto page 22 of your pack, a number of our panels have been really keen on looking at our reserves and our level of reserves and how they are going to track over the medium-term financial plan. And the key one to look at here is the risk reserve. This is the reserve that we hold for unforeseen circumstances, but also if we have an overspending year or if some of the savings aren't able to be delivered. And you'll see the risk reserve dropping over the medium-term financial plan. Three things in there. One is that we are overspending this year, and we'll need to draw that overspend from reserves unless the overspend reduces by the end of the financial year. Secondly, we already assume to use 7.9 of reserves to fund this year's budget. And thirdly, the plan is to use up to 15 million of reserves in next year's budget. So you can understand why the position has decreased over this and next financial year. And then on page 23, you've got what might be known as an income and expenditure account in the private sector, where we've got the current budget today, adding on all the expenditure that we think is going to be additional next financial year, minus all the additional income and savings that we have got on the table at the moment, and that will come up to the gap of 33.6. And just a point to note is that we haven't yet received our final settlement. We haven't had any indication from central government or from any of our lobbying that there will be anything different, but there may well be. But we are awaiting the final settlement, which I'm not expecting this week. We're hopeful that it'll be over the next couple of weeks and certainly before the end of February. But we've had no formal indication of when that settlement is likely to be received. So you'll see on slide 25 the budget planning timetable. We are, as I've said, the last of the 5 scrutiny panels that's meeting this morning. And then we will take the updated proposed budget to Cabinet on the 6th of February and then to full council on the 13th of February. And that will obviously take feedback from this panel and every other panel and the scrutiny and challenge and consultation that we've had from other parties, including trades unions, schools, businesses, and of course our parishes. So I'll take a pause there. That was a bit of a canter through. I'll take a breath and feel as though if there are any questions, I'll consider those questions now. Chair, if I may, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. One thing I want to say before I bring it into questions from everywhere is one was just a comment and the other one was going to be a question. So obviously in the news, it's got Hampshire, who is just underneath us in that graph you've got there, has decided that it's applied to increase their council tax by 15%. That means actually we're going to be second in that table rather than third. So for our residents to understand that even though they think they pay a lot of council tax, actually ours is definitely amongst the cheapest. But then I wanted to ask a question. Now, obviously, we know in this next year we're going to have to spend a certain amount of money planning for unitary and devolution changes. Is there going to be any funding from the government for us to be able to have office hours towards that cost?
The government has indicated that there is funding to support local authorities. The value of that, what that's for, how we get that funding has not been identified as yet. The full details has not been made clear, but they have indicated there is funding available, but the size and scope and detail of that is yet to be fully determined.
Thank you. So Matt's already raised his hand. Any other on the, and then Brandon for the about the overall position.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Steph, for that. Firstly, a comment and then a question. And the comment is just on page 2, what's it, the 4th bullet point down, where it says our overspend position is not because of poor control, oversight, or policy decisions. I mean, that to some extent is a political statement, because in my view, I would say policy decisions back in, as the point just made about us having low council tax, that was always a Conservative position. We will have very low council tax. During the kind of 2010s, we did quite a lot of austerity, lots of cuts. We took the kind of freeze from the government. So I would say we're in the position we're in partly because of those political decisions we took. If we were higher up that graph, maybe more mid-table, mid-table obscurity, we would have maybe had more leeway to cope with that. So that's more of a comment, maybe a politician when I come back on that. But maybe I'll ask my question, and then which is just about, obviously, your example of Hampshire. Why did we not do a similar kind of thing of ask the Secretary of State permission to raise council tax? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say that one's both of those are political, even the second one. Steve wants.
Yeah, I'll just briefly come back in relation to that and refer to last year's budget setting when I don't believe there was any amendments made to our budget or any suggestions of a different budget being made by anywhere else. So that was so that's that point. Sorry, what was the second?
The decision to ask for being able to capitalise our revenue rather than being able to increase our council tax by 15%, such as Hampshire has. I think that was the point, was it not?
Yeah. In relation to that, I will just say that yes, this is the way that this Conservative administration decided to make a move. And in relation to comments that have been made previously about applying for this exceptional funding money, I think it's fair to say now that it's no longer exceptional, with so many county councils finding themselves in the same position with demand-led services. We are one of but many.
Thank you very much. Right, over to Brandon.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting what Matt brought up there. It's when he talks about political and everything else. In our last report, we talked about the vulnerable people on send and everything else. Imagine giving them a 15% increase, the parents, for their council tax. Then on top of the district council increases as well, which will probably be 20% and put them through into poverty. But that's a political choice. But this other political choice as well, when we talk about the particular thing, when we talk, you mentioned about Lancashire, and to me that is a political choice, because the government's decided to give it all to the metropolitan councils and not to the shire councils, which is, I think that's a major political decision. And Lancashire is the only shire district, shire county within the country. Now it is a political decision. But the part which concerned me more than anything else, Steph, in your report as well, when we talk about, and it talks about it on page 19, and we're talking about the removal of the various grants, such as the new homes bonus, and it's ironic, but the amount of houses we're going to build, the particular money which we got from them, from the sale of the houses, we will not get any more as a council because it's been reduced, and I guess it will go next year. That's my personal opinion. But are we talking about Steph, when you said about some of the grants we'll not know until mid-February, which could happen after we've actually set the budget as a council? Because one of them, you see, which obviously is a concern to my committee, is the allocation of the public ring fence grant, because that's a grant which is only for, which is, as it says in the title, ring fence for health in the council.
You're absolutely right. There are a number of grants that haven't yet been allocated or yet communicated. The public health ring-fenced grant is kind of outside the settlement. It's a specific grant that gets indicated, communicated, confirmed separately from the settlement. Last year we had that grant confirmed to us on the 6th of February. So we may get it before we set the budget. We may not. It depends on when we get communicated on that. As you know, 100% of that grant gets ring-fenced to the public health and the preventative activities across Worcestershire. So it's a very key grant for us. It's in excess of 33 million, so it is a key grant for us. So we are eagerly awaiting the allocation for confirmation of that grant. But it won't be part of the settlement. It's two separate announcements. So again, we wait for the settlement on the other grants. The new homes bonus, I can confirm, has been decreased. So we await central government's allocations. Thank you. Great question, Councillor.
Can I just come back on that?
Yes.
Steph, could you just clarify for me that if the grants which we are going to be late, right, at this moment in time, what happens if they come in after we've set the budget as a council? Do we have to have another meeting to set a different budget? Or we're just going to get extra money?
There's a recommendation, or will be a recommendation in the final report, that delegates a responsibility to the leader, who's the Cabinet Member for Finance, and the Chief Finance Officer to make any adjustments necessary to enable either the grants to be amended or to note the fact that for example, if the public health ring-fence grant stayed the same, it would be the same. If it would be higher, to note the fact that the amount of grant would be higher or lower, to put into place the necessary changes to the budget required by that increase or decrease in grants.
Okay, David, you wanted to come in on that point?
If I can, it was just to make a comment on the point Matt raised. I never understood why district councils and county councils are restricted to 5% increases in council tax. Town and parish councils can increase their precept to whatever they want. Now, just going back to when the county council did not increase council tax or had very low council tax, if there is no need to increase your council tax because you've got the income coming in to cope, then I think that's the right thing to do. Why would you increase taxation on your residents if there was no need to do so? However, when you then see things starting to change, then you can increase from 5 to 6 to 7 to whatever. That just makes common sense to me. And if we had been allowed to do that, and indeed all district and county council allowed to do that, I'm sure we wouldn't be in the pickle, if you like, that we all are in today.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm concerned here that we haven't got on to actually our own finance part here. I have got 3 more speakers on this bit, but I'm not going to take any more on this bit. I need to get on to the next one. So it's Nathan first, then Dan, and then Adrian.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and obviously conscious of your last point, and I wholly echo the sentiment of Councillor Chambers and Councillor Clayton on the points on the council tax. My 2 questions are to Steph, please, if I may. What is the assumption in the medium term on our pay award, please, in terms of percentage uplift? And number 2, obviously we are looking to capitalise £33 million. What's the annual cost of that, please, for the revenue account?
Thank you. Question 1, 3%. And question 2, it will depend on the Public Works Loan Board interest rate at the time of borrowing, because obviously what it is a permission to borrow, not necessarily, we don't take the loan out on day 1, we'll only take the loan out when we need to. So the cost of borrowing will be as indicated on the interest rates at that time. So it'll be exactly as it would be if you were taking a mortgage out. We would look at the interest rates at the time, look around where we can only take our interest from the Public Works Loan Board. So it's not like we can choose where we go from. The government has indicated it has to be from there. So the honest answer is right now I can't tell you because I don't know what the interest rate will be at that time, but it will be Obviously it will cost us money, and it'll cost us whatever the rate is at that point of taking the loan out.
Through you, Madam Chairman. Do we know what the rate is currently, please, just for an indication?
I'll get that to you.
Dan.
Apologies to Steph, I feel like this is a second round. Just want to clarify a point here. We haven't been able to afford this because our reserves have been depleted. And that's a very key aspect to this one. But also it's from the choices we've made, because it's all well and good being the cheapest if you can afford it, but there was £13 million worth of money we could have raised through council tax if we'd made the decision over the last 10 years, and we haven't. That equates to £4 a month in a Band D house, £2.70 in mine. But it means that if we'd done that, then my neighbour would have been able to get adult social care at a reasonable rate, and we wouldn't be making the kind of statements we're making as we go round. But the big issue with this is, what's the long-term solution? Let's presume that the government is as, should we say, not as helpful as we want them to be. And we're talking about a £33.6 million gap this year, a £43 million gap the following year. I suppose my question, Steph, is what is the long-term solution we may have to start looking at if we are trying to meet the needs of our residents, and at the same time it might not be there? Because at the moment I feel like we need to possibly start having those conversations, because I'm kind of running out of ways to ask the same questions.
Before Steph comes in, I think the fact that we're going to be facing unitary might answer that for us, because that's not up to that's being done to us. But Steph, based on what we have at the moment, I suppose.
I think that's an impossible question for an accountant to answer, and I'm sorry, Dan, I'll decline to answer that question.
Thank you very much. And Adrian, over to you.
Every good accountant always has an answer to every question. Surely, Steph, normally the answer I used to give was I'm going to employ a consultant to investigate it further. But anyway, just very quickly, I noticed that, and this is really a question I suspect for the Cabinet member, that we have another £2 million worth of savings badged in the fostering arena. Now, I think there's been considerable under-delivery of the Super Foster programme this year. And I would just see if he can reassure us that that's a realistic figure going forward.
Over to you, Adam.
I obviously won't profess to be the Cabinet member. I'll pass over to the Cabinet member in a second. There's the overarching fostering issue, absolutely, but broken down, it's a little bit more complex than that. You're absolutely right. The recruitment to specialist foster carers essentially has plateaued. We haven't given up, but it's plateaued. Alongside that, we are exploring a business case, which for all intents and purposes is spend to save. So specialist foster carers were incredibly competitive. You look beneath that, less so, to be frank, especially when we look at the regional comparisons. But there is something about not being reactive and looking at our whole fostering offer in the round and being a bit more joined up and being a bit more strategic about that. That's a work in progress. Watch this space. There's a relevance separately to regional fostering hubs. So in much the same way that we have the regional adoption footprint with the other four authorities, there's some real consideration and, just as interestingly, potential investment from the DfE with regard to doing something similarly with regard to fostering. That wouldn't be the sole approach, it would be an additional approach that may bring us some more resource. Specifically with regard to the 2 million figure that's been referred to, I am confident that we'll achieve it. The reason I'm confident is essentially for I want to say 6 months, but please don't quote me, for a limited period of time. We had Empower with us. They're no longer with us. My personal biggest learning from Empower was what's referred to the value in care tool. So translated, no more complicated than far more strategic and ongoing and evolving matching considerations between any given individual child and a potential foster carer. Long story short, it maximises your potential to achieve a good and then sustainable match for a given child. When we think about our children in residential care, who either shouldn't be, and that was simply a resource-led decision, or are now in a position where they are able, should be able to successfully step down. That's the cohort I'm referring to. I want to say, and I think I'm being conservative here and now today, we've already achieved 634,000 of that, but that's literally a handful of children. I don't want to over-egg the pudding unnecessarily. We haven't magicked up foster carers, so I'm talking about external foster care step down. So albeit relatively local to Worcestershire, these aren't our foster carers, but I would much rather have a child who is ready for residential step down in an external foster placement that isn't so far, because it's the right outcome for that child. And then in arenas like this, then I'll obviously shout about the associated savings that go with that. So we're on track. I think, again, from memory, I think it's August this year, it should be just 1.35 million of that 2 million target.
Before I bring in Steve, I want to say that this is an area quite close to my heart. Having been in foster care myself when I was very little, it is incredibly important that we get the right foster carers, but we need to make it possible that we can get them. So part of that is lobbying to make the process easier, to actually go through that process, being mindful that we still need to pick the best foster carers and not diminish the value of care from them. So I would definitely ask for us to consider lobbying still to make that process easier, because yes, we can do all we can to advertise, but if we're not getting people able to get through the process because it's too difficult, then we are losing people who possibly might not be able to fill in lots of forms, but are absolutely fantastic foster parents. So Steve, I'll bring you in. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Adam's really summed it up almost completely, I would say. But the point you make there, Chair, I take on board exactly what you're saying, but as corporate parents, we've got to ensure that we put the right child with the right parent whenever we can, and that right parent is right to be a foster carer. There are certain steps to overcome to become foster carers, but it's incumbent on us to make sure that we are getting the right people in the right setting. To that end, I attended a meeting quite recently in relation to somebody who was actually applying to become a foster carer, and the panel that sat, it was obvious that there were difficulties there as to whether they should or whether they shouldn't accept this particular person as a foster carer. But as I say, the thought processes that went into it were incredibly correct. They went down the right route. And at the end of it, I was still sitting there, I've got to be honest, to say a little bit 50-50, but maybe more towards yes, going with that particular foster carer. And lo and behold, they did. They did exactly that. And I'm sure it was the right thing to do. But it was a decision that had to be made, and it had to be made very carefully and responsibly. If I can just sort of go on and say about the way about health, it's not just foster care, it's the placements that Adam was talking about as well, where we, in the past, I don't think the authority has been quite quick enough in making sure that we try to move children, young people out of residential care as quickly as we could into foster care in particular, if it's right for that particular child. But that's moved on now, and it's happening, and it's going towards those savings, as Adam identified. We could also look at the issue of costs in relation to the way savings can be made in other areas, and one of those other areas is I would say, fantastic teamwork in negotiation and contract setting. It shouldn't be forgotten about. It's not just a question of, yes, we will take that at any cost, whatever. It is serious conversations about how we can move forward in relation to saving money. And finally, just to conclude in relation to that, I think it's right that we also note that there has been no tampering with the early provision budgets for children's services. We know full well that early intervention will make the difference very likely between whether a child will come into care or not at a later time. So in relation to that, as I say, there's been no interference with the budget there. That concludes, Chair.
That's brilliant. Do you want to come back on that point? But we do need to go through the rest of, because this is actually into the next bit anyway. So come on, Adrian, go on quickly.
Well, I just wanted to say, I mean, I'm delighted that the director gave that reassurance about the regional cooperation, because I've long maintained, although I've got absolutely nowhere with it, that on a regional basis we should be looking at secure accommodation. Because secure accommodations, I mean, I have come across cases where we are putting children in Northumberland in secure accommodation, or indeed in Nottingham, very unsuitably, or indeed those with long memory outside Bristol. And I think it would be reassuring if we could revisit that on the West Mercia police footprint. I would suggest would be the best way that it would work, possibly with Warwickshire being involved as well, because I do know they have similar cost pressures over the border to us.
Adam, over to you.
Work in progress. Work in progress that's DFE. I'm not going to take credit for it. It's for all the reasons that you've highlighted, and then some. Our highest, I'm pleased it's no longer the case, our highest cost placement not so long ago was £52,000 a week, and that was a child placed in secure Peterborough. So there's a regional DFE sponsored focus for what's called the Safe Centre, which will be a welfare secure unit. Work in progress, a lot has progressed, there is a lot to progress. Far from straightforward, as you can imagine, when you're looking at the setup of something like that regionally. I've obviously got a vested interest from a Worcestershire perspective, but there are another 13 regions who will have their own vested interests. So that's been played out at the moment. I suspect that post-spring we'll be in a much clearer position. So Steph, if not Steph directly, it will be one of Steph's colleagues who will be one of the funding formula gurus who goes to this spring event, and then we'll actually see what that morphs into in real terms. We're not in the real terms place yet, but behind your recommendation, yeah, absolutely, it's been recognised at government level for, and well, I'm not in a position to make a political comment, so I'll stop there.
Steph, then over to you to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to come back on Councillor Desmond's question relating to PWLB, the rates are obviously different depending on how long you take the loan out from, but the rates are at the moment between 5.64% and 6.12%, depending on the length of the loan, with a loan of 25 years being 6.12%. So I'll just move back onto my slides then, and we're on page 27 of your report, which is indications of the pressures within children's services. You'll see the growth demand figure, the pay inflation, contract inflation figures, etc. for children's services. That's looked after children, all age disabilities, education, and all of the other services produced by the Children's Services Directorate, not just social care. So the growth and demand is obviously based on a trajectory of children coming into the system, and that is not just delivery of services for looked after children, but it's also support that we give to children who may be on the Child Protection Register or children in need. Pay inflation is indicated there for the staff that we employ as a local authority, and the contract inflation is obviously for all of the services that we buy in. That may be external fostering, residential, supported living, etc. That does include an element of forecast for the national minimum wage and national insurance, Obviously, every placement is a forecast, as the CMR has just said. We do a placement by placement purchase, so we don't purchase everything on a massive block contract. Every child is looked at based on their own individual needs, and we purchase placements on individual needs. But we have included an element for the estimated impact of those changing costs for us as a local authority. You may remember a couple of years ago we had a saving target relating to what we called vacancy management, and this is a saving that we make when for the time lag between when somebody leaves and a new person starts. There's obviously some period of vacancy where there's not a person being paid. And there has been savings made by the local authority as a whole for that period of the gap. However, that has not been as big as now as it was, for a number of reasons. A lot of vacant posts are being deleted to make savings, and also in areas like children's services, it's a statutory need to have that post filled. So either we recruit very quickly to another established post, or indeed we may need to bring in an agency staff member when it's a critical need to deliver a service to the child. So across the council, we've looked at rebasing the budget to remove about half of that saving target across the board, and that equates to a budget increase of £1.5 million for children's services. And bringing in the recurrent pressures from last year, i.e. the year that we're in at the moment, into next year, gives an indicative investment of just under 26 million for children's services. And just to note that these do include budget's element to what used to be managed corporately when we were in a contract with WCF, but we've now got Children's Commissioning and Partnership, Buildings and Pensions, and the Children's Section 75. But they're not in this panel. They're obviously contained within the community section of the Cabinet report. So the investment is offset by a number of reductions, 5.7 million of reductions. There's a full year effect of what Adam is already leading on for this financial year, and also some new proposals for 25-26. If there's any questions on those in detail, I'm sure Adam will be able to respond to them, but in total that gives us proposals of 3.75 million for children's services to deliver in 25-26. And as I articulated earlier on in my presentation, we have had additional grants for social care across adults and children's, and we have split that grant 50-50 across adults and children's services. And we've had the children's prevention grant of 1.67 million, which gives you a total increased grants for children's services of just under 5.4 million. So when taking the investment off the income off the investment, there's a net investment of just over 15 million into children's services for 25-26. And for those of you who like detail and are looking at Appendix 1, you'll see in one of the right-hand columns a figure of 4 million minus for other adjustments. I want to make it absolutely clear that that's not a reduction in children's budgets. That's a reallocation of budgets to other parts of the council, mainly support services and property services following the company's transition back into the county council. So the majority of that has gone into support services to continue funding the support services that previously were delivered by the company themselves. So in summary, you've therefore also got the home to school transport budget increases and decreases. I'm not sure that you need a lot more detail. We've had quite a big session on home to school transport this morning, but what you will see that there is a net investment into home to school transport of just under 11 million. Following savings, full year effective savings and new savings, including increasing the pass rates for next financial year. So I'll pause there and take questions, Chair.
Thank you. I'm actually really relieved that you mentioned that there was a reallocation from us, because when I saw that minus 4 million, I was quite worried, and that was going to be a question. So you've answered that. I was going to ask, and it's not in this budget, but it does very much affect children, is the domestic violence grant that we had a motion and we sent a letter about. Have we received that? Have we heard word that we're going to receive that? Because that is incredibly important to our children.
We have indeed, and we are fortunate enough to have had that confirmed as part of the settlement, and it has actually increased. So it now stands at 1.4 million, so it's gone up by 280,000. So in the draft settlement, within the Cabinet report, you'll see a line in one of the tables, table 11, I think, off memory. There's a line in there that says domestic violence grant and the increase that's gone up. So yes, I'm really pleased with that, following a number of challenges that this panel, our CMR and nationally, was made on that.
That's brilliant, and I think we ought to thank everybody who was involved with lobbying for that, so that we got that back. So put in our thanks, please, to everybody who helped to make that happen. Right, over to questions for anybody on this one. Obviously, we've just gone through a lot on home to school transport, so we probably don't have many questions left on that. Obviously, the main one then, if no one's got anything really to pick up, is yes, we have to keep making savings and trying to continue to deliver increased services and improved services, not just for the demand we've got, but actually better for those who are in the system. How is this budget going to affect us on the actual delivery arm?
So if I said no problem at all, you'd laugh at me. So just to add a little bit more detail to what Steph said, the budget is achievable, first and foremost. However, it's a tough ask, and let's not dress it up. Those savings have got to be achieved. The savings that have been identified as savings that do not adversely impact children's services. So it was children's services themselves that identified these savings opportunities. We've delivered pretty well against last year's savings, not completely, but pretty well. But again, contextually, we also had the largest area of spend with placements as well. So there's a whole equation to that picture. We're moving to a world now where you referenced it earlier on in terms of devolution. We've also got significant reform that's not so far away with regard to children's services. So specifically, I'm referring to the Children's Wellbeing Bill and Schools Bill. That's expected to go through in spring. We've got recurrent meetings now with the DfE, which essentially, okay, what does that look like in real terms? What's that going to equate to? And most pertinently, where's the investment going to be for that as well? Because inevitably there will need to be investment. The notion of, and I'm being incredibly broad brush here, but the notion of the reform that's going to be forthcoming goes back to what Councillor McKay was referring to in terms of prevention. Let's avoid escalation. Let's avoid repeat different social workers for children, changes of teams, becoming looked after, etc., etc., etc. So it is absolutely the right notion, but alongside that, we're very keen to hear, okay, well, what will that investment be as well in terms of children's social care? That said, the notion successful application of that reform in practical terms means a real multi-agency focus, and we've already demonstrated how we can achieve that within one facet of our service. So again, being very, very broad brush, it's essentially extending that approach. So other agencies have their own budgets as well. So bit of a long-winded answer, and still very broad as well. Yes, it's achievable, but it's not easy, and it's obviously as well one of the key factors is making sure that we maintain our looked after children numbers at the current level. So in real terms, what that means is in the last 12 months, our overall looked after numbers, which as of this morning are 1,050, have essentially been steady state, and yet the demand has not been steady state. So it is about making sure that we exit children better than we have historically done, and more to the point that we continue to achieve that, because if we don't achieve that, then those numbers will increase, the demand of placements will increase, and for the purpose of this conversation, a budgetary conversation, then we will struggle to maintain that budget. So yes, it's achievable, but it's not easy.
Thank you. So I think we've picked up a bit here on the devolution topic, and I have mentioned it before, but I'm going to obviously mention it again, is that if done right, this could be a really good opportunity for children's services. So I am looking, I suppose, towards all of you on this side of the room to make sure that when we are looking to that devolution question, that we're looking at how can we have more joined up services going forwards. And Steve and I were both in the CAMS task group where we looked at how we can achieve that, and I still think that is going to offer best solution for our children. But if I've got no more questions from anybody else, what I'd like to do is ask both of the cabinet members to say a few words on this budget, on where you think we are, so that we can, and then if nobody's got anything else, we'll go on to the works programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity just to conclude. I want to reassure you and the panel, in view of what you just said. Steve and myself have fought very hard over the last 6-7 months. As you know, we have corporate business board meetings, which suddenly have been happening, almost weekly in some cases in preparation for the budget. And clearly, the local authority had to make savings in order to get to present to council ultimately a balanced budget. But we fought very hard to ensure that any savings that are made within our two areas are savings which we can sustain, and that will not in any way affect the quality of the services that we are providing and intend to provide for the continuing 12 months. So I just wanted to give you that assurance, that endorsing really what Adam has said, that we can work comfortably, we can work within the budget that's been presented to you today. Steve?
Yes, thank you, Chair. You raised the issue of devolution. I will comment insofar as saying that, in my opinion, looking back at from 2016, when we were described by Ofsted as an inadequate service, we've moved on from that. We've moved on from it as a one Worcestershire, one area, one large capability of providing a service to children and families in this county. My view is that that should remain as far as possible. We've done it. We've done it with the best will by our workforce. I would like to see that remain and stay. I wouldn't like to see in any way it broken up to cause further problems to what is already a difficult service, as described by Adam. Adam said that we can achieve the budget savings. He is looking at it, I'm sure, as a service that we have at present. And as I say, I wouldn't like to see that broken. I would like to see it remain as it is, in order that we can work together in a way forward that would produce those savings and at the same time provide the best possible service for children and families.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Steph and your team for coming up with these very difficult budgets and for presenting them, and obviously for Adam and your team for coming up with the savings, and of course you guys too as Cabinet. We are going to be moving on to the work programme, so you don't have to stay, but thank you ever so much for your time today. So we're going to talk about the work programme. I would probably like to say at this point, if there's anything we want to add on to it, now we have said homeschool transport coming back to us, let's do that. I don't want to take anything off though until we get to the next meeting, because until probably the end of this week, we won't know and we don't know what we don't know. So once we do know more about devolution and how that might impact our work programme, because we might then be looking at scrutiny ideas for how we help to facilitate that, whatever it looks like. So we've got on there bringing back home school transport. I would like it to be slightly less than 12 months because it's very close to the budget, and I'd like to be able to look at it a little bit further before the budget. And does everybody agree on that? Yep. And is there anything else anybody wants to add to the work programme? No. Okay. Well, with that in mind then, I think we are at the end of the meeting. Thank you very much. I know we went over, but as always, there's lots and lots for us to talk about in these sessions, and I really do want us to get through as much business as possible without, if we go over, we go over. Thank you. Thank you.